Hello. Today I'm kind of wondering about something in specific. It's something I always enjoy discussing, and that's the question of, what is the difference between taking something in, watching a film, observing an actor, reading a book, hearing a song, versus, people who actually create all the stuff. And in my mind, I really do think there's a huge world of difference in the act of creation or the act of just observing. Some people are absolutely incredible observers, but it seems that they can't actually, or perhaps just have absolutely no interest in creating anything themselves. And I do think that over the years I've identified uh, some of the reasons people run into some problems when they try to create themselves, and I do think a lot of it has to do, well, with self confidence in a way. I think that when you constantly only take in other people's stories, other people's songs, there's something, it's really relaxing sometimes to just sit back and take in someone else's art. And obviously every artist, I used to have this buddy years ago, and we got into many arguments because we wanted to write songs together, and I was very adamant about, I kept saying again and again, listen, we have to learn the other songs. We have to learn the Rolling Stones songs. We have to learn Dylan's songs. We have to learn Led Zeppelin's songs if we're going to want to write our own songs. And he didn't want to learn any of the other songs. And I think at times I've gotten carried away, truthfully, with playing other people's songs. But even then, even performing, like, because I've actually performed Dylan's songs, I probably performed every song that he ever wrote myself. I haven't uploaded all of them, but I've certainly performed all of them, at least to my own lonesome. And you become very intimate with an artist's work when you actually perform it yourself. I think even the average listener has that experience. Sometimes the average listener does perform the songs themselves, in their car, if you know all the lyrics, say to a popular song on the radio that plays a lot that a lot of people seem to know, I've noticed, is something like Alanis Morissette's Ironic. A lot of people know that song and they sing along with it and they know every lyric. They kind of become Alanis Morissette as they're driving in the car. So they're performing the song, they kind of know it. However, they know they're not playing the composition, they're not playing the chords on the guitar, they're not playing it on the piano, etc. So they're not really, they're not going, and Alanis is always there to help them. Like a lot of times, I've um, I've been with people and they say, "Oh, play, you got the guitar, play Ironic." I know that song. I know it by the back of my hand. And then I'll play it on the guitar, and turns out they don't remember any of the lyrics. They only remember them when Atlantis is there. What a strange name that is in a way. When Atlantis is there, holding their hand, helping them along in the song. It's a completely different process to actually just play it by oneself, to remember the lyrics oneself. And you notice a lot of different things about the lyrics when you're actually doing it yourself. And hold on a second, I gotta. So I was saying, it's a completely different process when you actually have to do it by yourself. There's millions of songs that I've heard and I enjoy, and a lot of the time on this channel, you'll even see there are a lot of songs I enjoy that are from quite varied genres. For instance, one of my favorite songs of all time, and I get very upset when there's a song that I really love that I can't play. And you'll notice that on my channel, I've just performed a whole, I've performed as many songs as I possibly could in as many diverse genres, and I've tried to put them all just onto the acoustic guitar, which I consider to be the rough draft way. For me, a big part of the process I love to see how the artist came to create a song, and I love to imagine the day or where they were when they wrote the song. I love the simplicity and the beginning. I love, almost in a way, I guess I love the birth process. That's what I would consider it. I love to see something new being born. And after I'm kind of like a negligent parent. I just give birth to kids and then I chuck them out the window and don't look at them anymore. But, and I think that so as I was saying, once they're stripped of Alanis Morissette's vocals, many times the listener who believes they know the song like the back of their hand doesn't know any of the lyrics at all after she's gone, because it's totally different. Of course, you remember the song when she's singing it to you, and then the second she stops singing it to you, you forget the melody, you forget the composition, you forget the whole bloody thing. And um, and then I went back to what I was saying about so for an artist, oftentimes let's call that intake. An artist needs to do intake, which is intaking, taking in others art. That's the process of, where did you find your inspiration? And then there's outtake, where, you're eating. Oh, I'm listening to Led Zeppelin, being inspired by Led Zeppelin. I'm reading D.H. Lawrence, I'm being inspired by D.H. Lawrence. And then there's outtake, which is I'm coming up with my own stuff that's, playing off of all this other stuff that I've heard. And that's obviously a very important process. That's the process that's been happening for all this time in our culture, no matter what it is. With computers, they gave us Windows, and then they some other programmer came and worked on Windows a little more, and he fiddled around and he made it a little better, so on and so forth. Intake and outtake, and a lot of times it can be very difficult to switch from intake to outtake because number one, and one of my problems is there's so much stuff that I want to check out. And when you're trying to do outtake, when you're trying to actually create yourself, uh, it takes a long time to create something. And those are all hours that you could be taking in some stuff. And it can be really hard to juggle those two. And personally, I mean, I have no discipline whatsoever. So juggling those two is very difficult for me. I mean, for instance, this summer was mostly just a summer of, and this is rare for me, but it was mostly just a summer of intake. And I've referenced before how now I think some people think they need too. What the problem is some people need too much intake. For instance, I was writing stories and songs really before I even took in a lot of stuff at all. And I can see very clearly in certain people's work that they've done no intake, as not as much intake as I would say I have done. I've done a fair amount by this point. Too much. In a way, I sometimes think I've done too much because I do love being an observer in my own way as well. I love analyzing and picking apart other people's work. I'm a critic, an enormous critic. I love criticizing other people's work. And I never want anyone to criticize my work, but that's another thing. We go and criticize other people's work, and that's that when when you're actually creating something yourself, you notice a lot of people criticize and criticize and criticize, and those people are necessary, but sometimes they do go too far. I'm always very cautious to criticize anything in a way. Yeah, you have to wait a long time. Like it's hard to criticize someone who's just releasing something because it can be really hard to fully, you're not like fully aware yet of the overreaching consequences of what's being released or something. But so the process of intake and outtake, I mean, how do you juggle those two? It's so hard. Um, and again, the thing that's important is a lot of it. I think an artist does need to be at least somewhat aware of what was going on before, in a way at least. If it depends what kind of artist I suppose you're aspiring to be, but I think that it's good when a creator is aware of many things that happen, because you're going to find that it's a lot easier to flesh out your work at that sense, I think. But again, it can be so hard to try and take in a lot of stuff. So for instance, with my buddy, I remember all those years ago, he was bored listening to other songs. He didn't want to listen to other songs. He certainly didn't want to perform them or learn them, because it takes a damn long time to figure out how to learn other songs. And then the other problem is sometimes to put it bluntly, we fuck ourselves because we get too influenced, and I've seen this in my work as well. Sometimes now with the guitar, I wonder, have I taken in too much other shit to really be able to write a completely original song now? I don't know. It's kind of tricky. I mean, even in the greatest artists, I mean, with Dylan's story, it's so evident. All his early work is based around Woody Guthrie, and you see Woody Guthrie even in his later work. And then, for instance, he just released this latest album called what? Shadows in the Night, and it's like Frank Sinatra with like a really raspy voice. So one can see, even the casual listener can kind of see that Dylan was probably checking out a lot of Frank Sinatra. I don't like this album personally at all either, because it takes away. It's so far off the beaten track of what he does, and I think it's just all cover songs. Let me check here. Yeah, I think it's just all cover songs. So for Dylan, there's a lot of songs I'd like to hear him sing, but I don't know. I like these songs, but I like the songs he performed. I just don't. And I like the fact that he did the album. I mean, I can appreciate it. Um, but I would have preferred a whole new album with whole new songs, because that's what we love as fans about Bob Dylan. We love that he writes his own songs. So for him to and the acoustic thing would have been cool too if he did that again. But hold on. This video is not done yet. This video is not done. I still have some more to say on the process of intake and outtake. So now a famous, I'll try to think of a famous example besides Dylan where the process of intake and outtake. Well, alright, in the beginning of the summer, I made some videos referencing the real birth of rock and roll. Now you see the process of intake and outtake really well there. It's actually really, really clear to any observer, or well, not these days because everyone's forgotten everything, but back in the day, I think it would have been possible to really see. I mean, you see that Zeppelin took in, they took in all the blues stuff by the black blues artists, and then at the same time, you see that Jimmy Page and Robert Plant took in a lot of classical influences, and then what comes out but this whole new thing, and that's why the process of intake is really huge. Like we see that there. We see exactly what they were taking in. And a lot of the times, it's been a famous thing where an artist won't admit what he's taken in, and I always found that a little silly. I'm very free with my references and my influences and my heroes. I love throwing them out there. I want everyone to know what I've dug. I want everyone to know, because I loved it so much that I just want to share it. But a lot of the time you'll find, for instance, with a lot of people, I had one friend I was talking to, I remember, who was reading, a story about a certain rock and roller, or maybe it was like Eric Clapton or something. And, this guy loved Eric Clapton. And then he read that Eric Clapton had been influenced by Howlin' Wolf. So you think, well, I love Eric Clapton, dude. So I'll love Howlin' Wolf because Eric Clapton loved Howlin' Wolf. And then you're listening to the Howlin' Wolf albums and you're like, I don't like this at all. What the frig is this? I find that hilarious. He loved Eric Clapton, doesn't like Howlin' Wolf at all. Well, I find I can appreciate Howlin' Wolf, but no, I can't appreciate him in the same way that I can appreciate Eric Clapton, because Eric Clapton has more meaning for me. I heard the Eric Clapton songs when I was 5, 6 years old in the car. I have personal memories attached to the Eric Clapton songs. Howlin' Wolf was almost just something I studied, almost in like a formal setting almost. You know what I'm saying? It was just something I checked out for the sake of pursuing the connection, the line. And I think that these days the line is becoming ever more difficult to find. What is the line? I'm actually very interested in the thing I call we'll call it the chain. I call it the chain, or you can call it the line. And essentially the line is, what connects someone like starting here. Here's 2015, and we have the band the Foo Fighters still going on. And what connects the Foo Fighters to something as old as, say, Shakespeare and his sonnets? Well, that's really interesting for me because there is a connection, even if it's very, very slight. And you could trace that chain and that line. You could trace it all the way back to Shakespeare. And one quick jump from Foo Fighters all the way to Shakespeare would be, well, the Foo Fighters obviously were born out of Kurt Cobain in a way. And, Kurt Cobain was kind of born out of the Beatles and out of the Doors generation. And, the Beatles and the Doors, well, they were kind of born out of, just like poems. And so, it gets traced back. And if at any point in that line they just stepped out of nowhere with absolutely no background, what the hell would even be created? I mean, let's say we had a kid who never heard one song. What kind of songs would that person sing? He never heard another song in his life. He didn't, we're all connected. When you see art, that's why this is why I think it's very political in a sense too, because there's a lot of people who say, like, now let's take it away from art for a second, because what I like to call it is, I have the personal philosophy, I believe in cooperation, not competition. I think competition has a place in our culture, but I think our culture has put way too much emphasis on competition. It's like, it's gotten to a point where it's all we value anymore, and we forget how important. What happened is, and forgive me for preaching, but this is my view, and I really think we've forgotten how important cooperation really is, and that cooperation is always there, even if you don't want to admit it. For instance, we see that a lot of people who become extremely successful like to have this little phrase they pull out of their back pocket, and it's called the "I've done this all by myself, I had no help from anybody else" phrase. Well, what are you talking about, man? Because, if one of my videos went huge and viral on YouTube, well, do you know how many people helped me along with that? The guy who created the webcam, the computer that ran the webcam, the people who watched the video that made it viral, the people who created YouTube, the guy who created the browser so that YouTube could run, the guy who programmed Windows so that Windows could run, so that I could run the fucking webcam, but I could run YouTube, the guy who created the book of tablature so that I was able to learn how to play the guitar songs, the dude who built the guitar. Nothing is just sitting alone. What is the phrase they use? A vacuum? And a lot of people, "Yeah, I really did it all myself, Johnny. I did it all alone. All of it." Nah, nothing works like that, man. It's the process of intake and outtake. And some people, what happens, I think, and this goes back to intake and outtake, because somebody puts out something incredible, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, that's incredible. You're incredible. Everything you've put out is incredible." And then that person forgets somehow all the stuff that they took in. Okay? They forget. And they think that they just created what they created out of nowhere. Baby, it don't work like that. You see, it does not work like that. You do not create alone. Everybody is influenced by something. It's the intake. Even if you don't even realize you're actively taking something in, you're still taking it in. Of course, when you sit down and you say, "I'm going to listen to this Stones album and I'm going to analyze it and be inspired by it." Okay, that's conscious intake. You're consciously setting out with a goal to take that in. But sometimes you're not even meaning to do that. When I'm forced to drive down the highway and sit in traffic, I'm taking something in, and it's something I don't necessarily want to take in, but I'm being forced to take it in. So it's always a give and take, and I think that's the most that's a big deal. That's a big deal. That's all. That's all I have to say. I'm going to try to continue in a second.